They were bred to fight, then abandoned like broken tools. 8 German shepherds, scars on their bodies, frost in their lungs, dumped on the roadside in a winter storm. No food, no shelter. Each breath was a battle, each hour a countdown. No one came, no one cared, until he did. A former soldier, now a truck driver, haunted by war and heartbreak, slammed the brakes. What he saw shattered him. What he did next. It didn't just save them, it might have saved himself too. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. And if you believe no soul should be left behind in the cold, hit that subscribe button, because this story will warm the parts of your heart you thought were frozen.
The snows in Appleton, Wisconsin didn't fall like in postcards. It slammed. Thick, wet, wind-driven flurries slashed across the windshield of Jake Reamer's 18-wheeler as he pushed through the early morning gray. It was barely 7:30, and already the temperature hovered near 10 degrees. Frost clung to everything. The road signs, the mirrors, even the inside corners of his cab. He had 3 more hours of driving ahead before reaching Duluth, where a warehouse awaited 20 pallets of processed lumber. His dispatcher had called 3 times already, agitated, reminding Jake that delays would cost them the next contract. But none of that mattered the moment he spotted the shapes on the side of the road. He eased his foot off the gas. Something wasn't right. There, off to the shoulder, just past a snow-dusted mile marker, lay a cluster of uneven mounds. At first, he thought it was debris, bags maybe, or insulation. But when the headlights caught one of them just right, it moved. He braked hard, tires crunching against the ice as he pulled to the shoulder. He threw on his hazard lights and opened the door. The wind slapped his face like a memory. He stepped down, boots sinking into snow up to his ankles. The shapes didn't stir. He moved closer, cautious, but drawn by something he couldn't explain. Then he saw it clearly. Fur. Thick, matted, discolored fur. There were dogs. 8 of them. German shepherds. Adult size, maybe 3 years old, but gaunt, sunken around the ribs. Their coats were filthy. Blood, dirt, and ice tangled together in rough patches. One had a torn ear. Another had both eyes swollen nearly shut. Their bodies trembled with cold and exhaustion, but none barked, none growled. They didn't even lift their heads. The wind howled above them, indifferent. Jake knelt down beside the closest one. Its breathing was shallow, the kind he remembered from battlefield injuries. He laid a hand on its side and felt a tremor ripple through the animal. It didn't move away. It didn't react at all. He counted them. 8 in total, all clustered together in the snow like discarded equipment. Their paws were raw and red. One had a chain still looped around its neck, the rusted links dragging across the ice like some grotesque necklace. Jake stood slowly, his breath puffing white into the wind. A part of him wanted to scream. His name was Jake Reamer, 47. A man worn by both war and time. His build was solid from years of military service, though his shoulders slumped now under the weight of solitude. A thick beard covered the jawline he once kept sharp, and deep lines bracketed his steel blue eyes. Jake had returned from Iraq 11 years ago. Since then, life had unraveled in slow, quiet spirals. His wife gone, taking their daughter Lily with her. The house too empty, the nights too long. Driving kept him alive, barely, and now this. He fumbled for his phone, hands stiff with cold. No bars. Of course. The next town was 20 miles up. If he left them here, they would die. If he stayed, the cargo wouldn't make it on time. And if the company didn't get paid, he might lose the only job still paying his bills. He looked down at the dogs again. One of them, larger than the rest, scar down its left flank, lifted its head. Its eyes locked onto Jake's. There was no aggression there, just waiting. Surrender. His chest tightened. "Jesus," he muttered, voice catching in the wind. Then the radio crackled in his cab. His dispatcher's voice burst through, curt and irritated. "Jake, what's your 20? You were supposed to pass Green Bay 20 minutes ago." He didn't answer. The snow bit into his cheeks. He looked down again. Another dog tried to lift itself but collapsed. The chain around its neck clinked against the ice. He turned toward his truck, took 3 steps, then stopped. A memory slammed into him. Years ago, a buddy in his unit had begged Jake to carry a wounded bomb dog off a roadside in Fallujah. The dog had died en route to the medic tent, and Jake had carried its body in his arms. That was the last time he held anything warm. He cursed under his breath. Jake turned back toward the dogs, then the radio again. "Reamer, respond. We're not losing this load to another sentimental delay. You got 5 minutes to move." His jaw tightened. He stood in the snow, body torn in two. The war inside him louder than the storm. Responsibility versus instinct, logic versus compassion. Jake stepped back toward the truck. Each footfall felt like betrayal. One last look. The dog with the scar still watched him. Jake climbed back into the cab, slammed the door, and sat there. The engine hummed, the heater whirred, but his hands wouldn't move to the gear. He stared out the frosted window. The 8 bodies barely visible now in the blur of white. His radio clicked again. This time, he started the engine and shifted into drive. The truck pulled forward, and Jake drove away. But his eyes didn't leave the mirror. Not once. Not until the dogs vanished into the storm behind him.
Jake didn't make it more than 5 miles before his grip on the steering wheel began to ache. The road ahead blurred into a pale tunnel of snow, and the voice of his dispatcher faded behind the throb in his temples. He had told himself to be smart, deliver the load, collect the bonus, maybe finally patch the broken boiler in the bathroom, maybe even buy a plane ticket to visit Lily for her birthday in March. The heater groaned inside the cab, warm against his skin, but it couldn't thaw the sharp weight in his chest. The image of those 8 dogs, their breath misting weakly in the cold, the chain on one of their necks, the resignation in their eyes, haunted him like the old mortar fire did. That look. It was the same look he'd seen on Private Mason in Iraq, moments before the medic called the time of death. He slammed the brakes. Snow flew in thick arcs around the truck as he reversed into a side pullout. Jake didn't even radio in. He cut the engine, jumped down, and stood in the snow for a moment, heart hammering as if he were still being shot at. He didn't think. He turned the truck around. By the time he returned to the stretch of Highway 41, the dogs were barely visible beneath a fresh dusting of snow. A few had shifted, huddling tighter together, but none had moved far. Jake parked the rig on the shoulder and grabbed every blanket, tarp, and canvas sheet he had in the sleeper cab. He didn't care that his fingers were numb as he worked. He laid one tarp on the bed of the truck and gently, one by one, lifted the dogs inside. Their bodies were lighter than they should have been. Ribs poked against his arms. Some whined faintly. Others made no sound at all. One, thinner than the rest, with a thick scar across its muzzle, licked his wrist once, then closed its eyes. Back in the truck, Jake turned the heat to full blast and drove. He no longer had a destination, just a mission. Not long after he turned back, his phone rang. He saw the name flash across the screen. Mick Danvers, dispatcher, and reluctantly answered. The voice exploded from the other end. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Jake? You turn that damn truck around right now, or don't bother coming back at all." Mick Danvers was in his late 60s, squat and wide as a filing cabinet, with a greasy comb-over and a permanent sneer that curled even over the phone. He'd never served, never lifted more than a clipboard, but liked to bark like a general. To him, drivers weren't people. They were machines on wheels. Jake tried to explain. There were dogs, abandoned. They were dying. "I don't give a rat's ass about dogs, Reamer," Mick shouted. "You miss this delivery, you blow our contract with Lakeside Timber. And that fat holiday bonus you were hoping for? Forget it. You're done." Jake said nothing. "I told you last time, one more screw-up and you're off my roster. Well, consider it official. You can turn that rig in at the depot tomorrow, if you even have the guts to show up." The call disconnected. Jake stared at the screen. A year's worth of sacrifices, driving overnight, skipping meals, spending birthdays alone, gone in a barked sentence. But the silence in the cab wasn't regret. It was clarity. Jake set his jaw and kept driving home. Jake lived in a single-story house on the edge of Appleton, far enough from downtown to have quiet nights, but close enough to smell someone's backyard grill in the summer. The house was nothing special: beige siding, sagging porch, windows that didn't quite seal right, but it was his. The garage was half-insulated, mostly filled with old tools and dusty war memorabilia, but it had an outlet and a portable halogen heater. It would have to do. When he arrived, he backed the rig into his driveway and opened the garage door, praying the neighbors weren't watching. One by one, he carried the dogs inside, placing them on the old workbench mats and covering them with blankets. The space was tight, drafty, and smelled like rust and old paint. But it was dry. He plugged in the heater and angled it toward them. Jake crouched beside the scarred dog again, running a hand through its tangled fur. Its eyes fluttered open. It was the same one that had stared at him earlier. "You're still with me," he whispered. "Good." A soft voice behind him startled him. "Jake?" He turned. Standing just outside the garage door, holding a steaming mug of tea, was a woman in a wool cardigan, flannel pajama pants tucked into rubber boots, and a messy bun of auburn curls. Her name was Lana Whitmore, 35 years old, a novelist who had moved into the house next door nearly a year ago. Jake had seen her maybe 3 times, usually from across the driveway. She always looked a little distracted, eyes often scanning the sky or the pages of a notebook she carried like a shield. Lana was of medium height, slim but not fragile, with a sharpness in her features that spoke more of thought than vanity. She had the kind of gaze that could either see through you or write you into a story. She had published 2 mystery novels and now wrote full-time from home, having left a high-profile relationship in Chicago that had ended in betrayal and a public tabloid scandal. Since then, she had lived quietly, avoided noise, and didn't ask much from anyone. Tonight, though, she stepped into the snow and walked toward the garage, the light from the house spilling across the frozen driveway. "What is this?" she asked softly, looking past Jake at the dogs. "I found them on the side of 41, he said, standing up. "They were gonna die out there." Lana stepped closer, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "Oh my God, they're German shepherds. Some of them look like they've been in fights." Jake nodded. "I think they were part of something bad. Dogfighting, maybe. Left behind after a bust. I couldn't leave them." She crouched beside one of the dogs, her breath catching when she saw the bruises under its fur. "Some of them are bleeding. Do you have supplies?" "I have gauze, some antiseptic, not much else." She stood again. "Wait here." 10 minutes later, she returned with a small first aid kit, 2 heated blankets, and a bag of cooked chicken from her fridge. She didn't ask to come in. She just stepped inside the garage and got to work beside Jake, hands steady, movements quiet. Together they cleaned cuts, wrapped paws, and spoon-fed bits of meat to the ones who could swallow. Then, sometime past midnight, one of the dogs let out a soft, pained whimper. It hit Jake like shrapnel. The sound mirrored one he had heard in Fallujah, after a roadside IED had taken out his convoy. He had crawled through smoke and dust to reach a fallen handler, only to find the dog, Buddy, half buried under rubble, trying to breathe through broken ribs. The dog had died before the medics arrived. Jake had never forgiven himself. Lana saw the way he froze. "You okay?" she asked, voice gentle. Jake didn't answer right away. When he did, it was a whisper. "I've heard that sound before." Lana didn't press. She simply sat beside him, silent, offering warmth by presence alone. By 2 a.m., the dogs were resting, their chests rising and falling in a rhythm that felt fragile but alive. Jake leaned against the wall, exhausted, his flannel shirt soaked in sweat despite the cold. Lana stood and handed him a bottle of water. "You did a good thing, Jake, even if no one else ever knows it." He looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "I lost my job." She blinked. "What?" "My boss didn't like me turning back." "Then he didn't deserve you." Jake almost smiled. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft now, like it too, had decided to give him one more chance. Morning broke in Appleton under a sky the color of old steel. The snowstorm had passed, leaving behind a dull hush that blanketed the neighborhood in silence. Jake hadn't slept much. He'd spent most of the night in the garage, dozing upright against the wall, while the halogen heater droned quietly beside the 8 injured souls now lying on blankets and mats across the floor. Their breathing had steadied. That alone was something. He rose, joints stiff, and refilled their water bowls with warm tap. Most of the dogs stirred. Brisk, the scarred male, rose shakily to his feet and drank. Others licked their paws or shifted positions. None barked. None whined. The air in the garage felt thick with something else. Not fear, not pain, but stillness, as if they were waiting. Jake walked back toward the kitchen and found Lana already standing at his open door, holding 2 bags, one of groceries, the other full of clean towels. "I figured you'd need these," she said, stepping in without hesitation. She wore a padded navy coat over a faded blue hoodie, her hair tied back into a low braid. Her face looked tired but alert, and she offered a faint, knowing smile. Jake took the bags without protest. "Thanks, I didn't think you'd be up this early." "I couldn't sleep either," she said. "My brain won't stop writing headlines about this." Jake raised an eyebrow. "I used to freelance for animal rights blogs. Years ago," Lana explained, following him toward the garage. "Old habits die hard." Together they checked on the dogs. Lana moved down the line with a quiet ease, changing bedding and checking bandages while Jake set out small bowls of shredded chicken. As she leaned in to clean one dog's ear, Luna, the calm female, she froze. "Jake," she said, brushing back matted fur, "look at this." Behind Luna's ear, almost hidden beneath grime and scar tissue, was a line of faint blue numbers, tattooed crudely, the ink faded and broken. Jake frowned and examined it closely. It wasn't just her. A few of the others had similar markings, some inked, others burned. "They're not shelter tags," Lana muttered. This is organized. Fighting rings. Probably used to catalog them like inventory." Jake's throat tightened. He ran a hand over Brisk's shoulder, finding a faint brand beneath the fur. A crude R7, etched in uneven scar tissue. "I know what this is," he said slowly. "I've seen it. In Iraq. Local handlers used to mark dogs for bomb detection assignments. It's the same kind of cruelty, just here." Lana looked up. "Did something happen back then?" Jake didn't answer immediately. He sat down on the garage step, elbows on knees, and stared out at the snow through the cracked garage window. "There was a dog named Buddy," he began quietly, "trained to detect explosives. He belonged to a handler named Ortiz. We were hit outside Fallujah. I got thrown back. Ortiz didn't make it. I found Buddy under the wreckage, crushed, breathing so slow. I carried him for miles, hoping someone could help. He died in my arms." Lana sat beside him, her voice soft. "You never told anyone that, did you?" "No point," he said. "No one wanted to hear about the dogs, just the men." "You're wrong," Lana said firmly. "That story matters." They sat in silence, the heater clicking beside them, the dogs shifting gently in their sleep. The snow outside had begun to fall again, light and lazy, like ash. "I think we need to give them names," Lana said after a long pause. "They're not numbers anymore." Jake nodded, rising to his feet. He grabbed an old notepad from a shelf in the garage and wrote on the cover, "Dog Log Day 1." "All right," he murmured. "Let's see who's who." They started with the scarred male, stoic, watchful. "Brisk," Jake said. "He never breaks eye contact." The gentle female with the sharp gaze became Luna, the smallest, wiry male who flinched at every touch, Echo. The one with a rusted chain still dragging, Rust. The hyper-alert male pacing the same circle, Zane, a lean one with a clipped ear, Tango. The small female with fire in her eyes, Grit. And the biggest, calmest one, who had taken a protective position between the others, Mace. Lana smiled faintly as Jake wrote each name into the notebook. "They deserve stories of their own," she said, "not just scars." Jake looked down at the names. "I guess so do I." The frost still clung to the windows in Appleton, But inside Jake Reamer's garage, life had begun to return in shivering, panting bursts. It had been 3 days since Jake rescued the 8 German shepherds from the snowy roadside, and the transformation was slow, fragile, and far from complete. The makeshift recovery space, still cluttered with rusted tools and oil-stained floorboards, had become something sacred. Temporary, maybe, but real. Jake sat cross-legged against the wall near the halogen heater, scribbling into the notepad he now carried everywhere. Dog log, day 3. His handwriting was blocky, stiff from old calluses, but careful, precise. Outside, snow drifted lightly again, the kind that didn't stick, but whispered against the window panes, like fingers tapping from the past. Lana entered without knocking now. She carried 2 reusable grocery bags, one full of canned food, the other with a bottle of rubbing alcohol and another wool blanket. She wore a dark gray beanie pulled low and a parka that reached just above her knees. Her breath fogged the cold air as she moved among the dogs, checking each one without needing to ask Jake what had changed. Her presence had grown from neighborly concern to something steadier, constant, familiar. Brisk was the first to greet her. He didn't bark. He never did. But he walked directly to her, large frame moving stiffly, and sat at her feet with the solemn loyalty of a soldier returned to duty. "Morning, General," Lana said with a soft smirk, scratching behind his ear. "Still guarding your platoon?" Jake smiled faintly from his corner. "He's got better posture than half the guys I served with." Not all the news was good. Echo, the smallest of the group, had taken a sudden turn for the worse the night before. He'd stopped eating, shivered uncontrollably, and whimpered every few minutes with a high, keening note that cut deep. Jake and Lana had taken turns laying with him through the night, using warm compresses, heat pads, and whispered reassurances. This morning, Echo was still alive, but only barely. Jake knelt beside him now, draping a fleece jacket across the pup's narrow body. His ribs showed through the fur like bent wires. Lana sat beside Jake and passed him a syringe filled with electrolyte solution. He gently worked the dropper into Echo's mouth. "I called a friend," Lana said after a moment. "She's a vet. Her clinic's 40 minutes out, but she agreed to squeeze us in after closing." Jake didn't speak for a while. His jaw moved like he was grinding words before they reached his mouth. "I should have taken him sooner," he muttered. "You were doing what you could," Lana said firmly. "You're not a vet. You're one man, and they're alive because of you." Jake looked at her. His eyes had the worn, bleached-out blue of someone who'd seen too much too young. That used to be enough. Lana's gaze softened, but she didn't try to fix him with words. Later that afternoon, Jake loaded Echo into the back seat of his truck, wrapped in a towel, with Brisk riding shotgun, because Brisk wouldn't let them leave without him. Lana came along too, bundled in a brown coat with her notebook stuffed into her side bag, though she didn't write a word that day. The clinic was a small single-story building with a peeling green awning and an empty gravel lot. A sign read, "Dr. Rhonda Maple Veterinary Care by Appointment Only." Dr. Rhonda Maple was in her late 50s, with close-cropped silver hair, square shoulders, and a face that didn't change much between good news and bad. She wore faded scrubs, a long wool coat over them, and thin-rimmed glasses that perched permanently at the tip of her nose. Her voice was gravelly from too many cigarettes or too many disappointments. Or both. "You brought me a fighter," she said as she examined Echo on the stainless steel table. "Literally." Jake stood behind her with arms crossed, while Lana sat near the door, hands clasped in her lap. Rhonda ran her fingers along Echo's back, her expression darkening as she found the scars, the tattooed digits. She didn't comment right away, but her body grew tenser. "This dog's been through more than hypothermia," she said. "These scars are consistent with bite trauma, repetitive, old and new. He was used, probably as bait." Jake clenched his fists. "Can he make it?" Rhonda looked at him. "If he were anywhere else, probably not. But he's got someone fighting for him, so yeah, maybe." Jake exhaled slowly. After an injection, a bag of meds, and a list of post-care instructions, they were back on the road. Brisk never took his eyes off Echo the entire ride home. By evening, Jake was back in the garage, surrounded by movement. Not chaos, just life. Mace had begun exploring the tool corner. Luna liked to curl beneath Jake's old army jacket near the heater. Tango tried to steal socks. Russ still growled occasionally, but only when Lana touched his ears. Each one had settled into a rhythm. Jake noticed everything. He wrote notes for each. Brisk always positions himself between the door and the others. Luna flinches at loud sounds but likes Lana's voice. Grit makes eye contact, tail wagging more now. Might trust again. Zane paces when anxious, sleeps with paws covering nose. Echo, stable, silent, still watching. Rust will need time, very reactive. Tango eats the fastest. May need portioning. Mace, calmest. Seems to check the others before sleeping. That night, Jake and Lana sat on the garage steps drinking hot tea from mismatched mugs. The heater hummed. Snow danced outside like ash falling from a long burnt memory. "You know," Lana said, "I used to name every stray that wandered near my apartment in Chicago. Never got to keep any of them, but naming them, it made them real." Jake nodded. "You ever name one after yourself?" She smirked. "Too dangerous. I was saving my name for someone special." Jake didn't respond, but his smile lingered longer than usual. The dog slept soundly that night. For the first time, the garage didn't feel like a shelter. It felt like a home. 3 days after Echo's near collapse, the snow had hardened into a dull crust outside Jake's home, and the cold no longer carried panic. But the questions had only just begun. The dogs were recovering, slowly, with moments of playfulness between long hours of sleep, but their bodies still bore the history someone had tried to bury. Jake was refilling the water bowls in the garage when Lana called out from across the room. She had been brushing through Grit's neck fur with a gentle wire comb, removing mats and burrs. Grit, true to her name, tolerated it with a patient stillness that made her the favorite among the younger dogs. "Jake," Lana said, her voice different, focused. "Come look at this." He crossed the garage, wiping his hands on a towel. Lana held back a patch of fur just under Grit's collarbone, revealing a tiny bump beneath the skin. "I think it's a chip." Jake leaned in. It was subtle, barely more than a grain beneath the skin, but the shape was unmistakable. "RFID?" he asked. Only one way to find out. The next morning, they returned to Dr. Rhonda Maple's clinic, the dogs carefully transported in the truck, now lined with foam and straw. Grit sat beside Brisk, who had grown into a kind of older brother figure for the group. His mere presence seemed to keep the others calm. Rhonda stood by the exam table, arms crossed, scanning the dogs as they entered like a war nurse tallying new patients. Her short silver hair was pulled back under a beanie, her dark brown eyes sharper than the scalpel she laid beside the sink. "You've been busy," she muttered, helping Jake lift Grit onto the table. Her hands, firm but not cruel, swept over the dog's shoulders. Grit didn't flinch. Lana stepped forward. "She's chipped, we think." Rhonda raised an eyebrow. She pulled a handheld scanner from a drawer and swept it slowly over the dog's body. The device beeped once. "Well, I'll be damned," she muttered. She read the number out loud and typed it into her computer. A few silent seconds passed. Then her expression changed. "She's not just chipped. She's registered. State of Minnesota. Reported stolen from a K9 training facility over a year ago." She turned slowly to Jake. This dog was bred to be law enforcement. Jake felt like someone had reached into his chest and twisted. "You're sure?" Rhonda nodded. "No doubt. Facility shut down soon after. Theft investigation went nowhere, but if Grit's here, she wasn't just stolen. She was passed through hands that didn't care she used to wear a badge." Jake looked at Grit. The quiet strength, the way she always positioned herself between him and the door, it wasn't just behavior, it was memory. "We should scan the others," Lana said. They did. Over the course of 2 hours, Rhonda identified chips in 5 out of the 8 dogs. 2 were unregistered, likely street rescues used for bait. 1 was from an old farm in Iowa. And Brisk? Brisk's chip had been deactivated, manually. "That's deliberate," Rhonda said grimly. "Someone didn't want this dog found." Lana stood near the doorway, arms crossed, absorbing the weight of it all. These dogs weren't just victims. They were assets, stolen, stripped of purpose, and thrown into something monstrous. Jake paced the clinic. His mind reeled. What happens if we report them? Won't they just get taken from us, locked up in some shelter? Rhonda hesitated. Legally, these dogs belong to whoever still holds the claim, but some of these cases are so old, they've probably been forgotten or buried. Jake wasn't comforted. That's still a risk. Lana stepped in. Then we don't report them. Not yet. We go backward instead. Find out where they've been, not just where they're from. Rhonda leaned back against the counter, skeptical. And how do you plan to do that? Lana lifted her phone. I write. I still have contacts in animal welfare circles. Investigators, forums. Some of them owe me. If I can trace some of these scars, these chip IDs, we might be able to uncover the chain. Jake nodded slowly. And if we find something? Then we decide what to do next, she replied. Rhonda gave a reluctant nod. Just don't drag me into anything illegal. Wouldn't dream of it, Lana said with a faint smirk. Before leaving, Rhonda handed Jake a small envelope. There's another thing. Brisk's x-rays. I ran them last night after you left. He has microfractures across his ribs, multiple healed breaks in the back legs. This dog was trained, then punished, over and over. Jake stared at the envelope without opening it. Who would do that to a dog like him? Someone who wants control, Rhonda said, and knows how to break loyalty. Back at home, the garage felt heavier. Jake sat on the cement floor beside Brisk and let his hand rest on the dog's broad shoulder. You were meant for better than this, he murmured. Lana appeared a few minutes later with her laptop, already typing. I'm posting a blind inquiry to 3 groups I trust. No names, just injuries, chip IDs, and timestamps. Jake looked at her. Why are you doing this? She paused, then said, Because I've seen what happens when you look away. That night, Jake stood alone outside, snow drifting again. He looked up at the sky. Empty. Endless. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking of Iraq, or his ex-wife, or even Lily. He was thinking of 8 names he'd written in a notebook, and the brutal chain of hands that had failed them. Inside, Brisk stirred, sensing something in the air. And Jake, for the first time, felt a shift. Not from the world, but from within himself. The sun hadn't yet pierced the horizon when Jake Reamer stepped into the garage, the cold biting through his sleeves despite the old propane heater humming nearby. He moved silently, careful not to startle the 8 shepherds lying across wool blankets and patched cushions. The garage smelled faintly of antiseptic and warm fur, a scent that had surprisingly begun to comfort him. Brisk stirred first, as he always did. The scarred male lifted his head and turned toward the window, eyes fixed eastward. Jake noted it in the leather-bound notebook he kept on the old workbench. Brisk watches the sunrise without fail, protective posture. Doesn't move until full light enters room. Across the room, Luna remained tucked beneath a fleece throw, her small frame pressed tight into the corner. Jake crouched beside her, whispering her name. She blinked at him, hesitant, but no longer afraid. He jotted a new line. Luna seeks enclosure, calms only after verbal cue, trust building. One by one, he recorded subtle changes. Tango had begun licking his paw anxiously again. Zane's pacing now included a figure-8 loop. Rust snarled less during feedings. Echo no longer cried out in his sleep. He hadn't expected to care this much. Lana arrived a little after 7, bundled in a long tweed coat, wool scarf looped around her neck. She carried a tray of coffee and her laptop tucked under one arm. Her hair was in a loose braid down one shoulder. A pencil stuck in behind her ear. She smiled when she saw Jake, her eyes scanning the garage quickly, like a commander checking on her soldiers. You writing again? She asked, nudging the journal with her elbow. Trying, Jake muttered. They're starting to act like dogs again, not just survivors. That's the first step, Lana said, settling beside him on the floor. Memory isn't just what we say. It's what our bodies do when we're not thinking. She opened her laptop and clicked through her inbox. Her expression changed instantly. Got something. Jake leaned closer. Someone from an underground forum I posted on recognized 2 of the RFID codes, said they were linked to a kennel in Des Moines. Used to be a legal breeder. Got busted in 2019 for unlicensed enhancement training. Then they disappeared. Jake frowned. Enhancement training? Code for trauma conditioning, Lana said grimly. Breaking dogs down to rebuild them meaner, stronger, easier to gamble on. Jake's hand curled into a fist. Just then, Brisk lunged to his feet with a bark that rumbled from his chest like thunder. The others snapped up in alert, fur bristling. Jake spun around just in time to see a black SUV crawl slowly past the house again. Same vehicle, same deliberate speed. Jake rushed to the window. Through the frost-blurred pane, he caught a brief glimpse of the driver, a man in a tan hoodie, arm resting casually on the window, face hidden beneath mirrored sunglasses despite the overcast sky. The SUV didn't stop. It didn't need to. It had already delivered its message. Jake ran outside, boots crunching against old ice, but the SUV was gone by the time he reached the street. Inside, Lana rewound the footage from the security camera. The angle was imperfect, just the edge of the vehicle, but it was the second time in 3 days. "We need help," Jake said, jaw tight. "Someone who knows how to deal with this kind of threat." Lana nodded. "I might know someone." That night, Jake and Lana drove 40 minutes outside Appleton to a cabin surrounded by pines. The gravel driveway was half buried in snow, and the porch light flickered as they approached. Jake shifted uneasily as Lana rang the bell. The door opened to reveal Mary Ann Keller, a woman in her mid-60s with silver hair pulled into a tight ponytail and dark, lined eyes that missed nothing. She stood just over 5 feet, thin, but built like she had lived outdoors for most of her life. Her flannel shirt was tucked into thick jeans, and her boots looked military-grade. "You brought him," Mary Ann said to Lana with a hint of a smile. "Good." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You know me?" "Lana told me about you," Mary Ann said. "Former sergeant, Combat Transport Division. You've got dogs, you've got heat, and now you've got eyes on you. That's why you're here, isn't it?" Jake nodded. Mary Ann Keller was once a federal canine operations specialist. After retirement, she worked behind the scenes, tracking illegal dog trafficking rings, quietly tipping off authorities without ever showing her face. She owed Lana a favor, something to do with a book that never got published, and an editor who tried to silence her. Over black coffee and a fire, Mary Ann laid out a plan. "First," she said, pointing to the journal, "keep documenting every detail, time of barking, direction, pattern of cars. Dogs remember. If you watch them closely, they'll tell you who came near. Second, get infrared motion sensors installed, and if you can afford it, wireless cameras with cloud sync." Jake nodded. "Third," Mary Ann added, narrowing her gaze, "do not report this, not yet. Local authorities won't understand. The second these dogs hit a system, someone will flag them. Then you lose control." She tapped the table with her index finger. "But if you trace them back far enough, if you find the money behind the kennel, not just the men in hoodies, that's when you hit them where it hurts." Jake's throat tightened. "I just wanted to save a few dogs." "And now you've got 8 walking indictments," Mary Ann said calmly. "That's bigger than a rescue." They left the cabin near midnight, Jake driving in silence while Lana watched the dark tree lines roll past. When they pulled into the driveway, the garage light was still on. Brisk was sitting by the window, eyes fixed toward the street. It happened just after midnight, the kind of cold night where wind crept beneath doors and frost glazed even the insides of the garage windows. Jake Reamer was at the kitchen table, reviewing notes from the day, the house dim except for the yellow pool of light beneath a hanging lamp. Lana had just left an hour earlier, promising to return in the morning with upgraded motion sensors from Mary Ann's contact. The dogs were unusually quiet, then a sound, barely audible, metal against metal. Jake froze. It wasn't barking, wasn't whining. It was something different. Wrong. He bolted through the hallway and out to the garage, barefoot on tile and then concrete, the cold punching up his legs like shock waves. When he threw the garage door open, a bitter draft rushed past him. The heater had shut off, and one of the crates was empty. Brisk was pacing in wide, urgent circles. Rust barked frantically at the back wall. Jake scanned the row of beds. Mace, Tango, Echo, Luna, Zane, Grit. One was missing. Grit. Jake's voice cracked as he called her name, stepping further into the garage, searching behind crates, under blankets, into tool closets. Nothing. No blood. No broken latch. Just nothing. He checked the side door. Unlocked. He knew he had locked it earlier. He always locked it. A trail of prints in the thin layer of frost led out into the dark. 15 minutes later, Lana was back, having driven through black ice and fog. She didn't ask questions. She only grabbed her coat and a flashlight and followed Jake out into the night. They searched everywhere, side streets, alleys, behind gas stations. They asked late-night store clerks and overnight snowplow workers. No one had seen anything. Jake's chest felt like it was collapsing in on itself. I should have checked sooner. I should have been there. Jake, Lana cut in, firm. This wasn't your fault. This was planned. Just before sunrise, they reached Silver Ridge Park, a stretch of wooded land bordering the river, with an old footpath weaving through dead leaves and brittle grass. Jake spotted her first. Grit, lying curled under a bench near the edge of the trees, shivering, her front leg cut, blood seeping slowly into the dirt. Jake rushed over, dropping to his knees. Grit whimpered once, then pushed her head into his chest. She didn't want to move. Lana crouched beside them. Something caught her eye. Tucked under the bench, partly buried beneath a handful of gravel, was a folded slip of paper. Jake unfolded it with stiff fingers. The writing was jagged, pressed deep into the paper like it had been carved. I take back what's mine. Jake went still. The back of his neck burned. He looked at Lana, who nodded grimly. This wasn't a warning. It was a test, to see how far they could go. Back home, Grit's wound was cleaned and bandaged. She wouldn't eat, but she didn't stop looking at Jake. Every time he stepped out of her line of sight, she whimpered. Jake didn't sleep that day. He set up the new sensors Lana had brought, wired backup batteries to every camera, locked every door. Then he opened the notebook. He tore out the previous page and replaced it with new ink. Grit stolen, recovered at 4:47 a.m., wound shallow, emotional trauma high. This was targeted. Lana sat in the living room with her laptop. I'm contacting Avery. Jake looked up. Avery? She nodded. Avery Clay, journalist, old friend, used to write for the Post. Now she's independent, investigative, hard-hitting, smart. She broke the Shepherdtown hoarding scandal. She'll know what to do with this. Jake hesitated. Won't that expose the dogs? Lana shook her head. Not unless we let it. She works with whistleblowers. I've sent her anonymized photos, videos, and some scans from your logbook. If anyone can trace the money or find a pattern in the chip data, it's Avery. Later that evening, Avery called. Jake sat beside Lana on the couch, the dogs lying around them like silent sentinels. Avery Clay's voice crackled through speakerphone, low, steady, and sharp. This is bad. I've seen worse. But this is connected. The RFID numbers match missing dogs from 3 different states, and one of the names you mentioned, Zane, was reportedly euthanized last year. Jake sat forward. What? I have vet records, photos. Zane was put down after a fight raid in Idaho, or so they said. The chip matches. That means someone faked his death and moved him across state lines. Jake's hand curled into a fist. Grit lay against his leg, her breathing still uneven. Whoever did this, Avery continued, they're moving dogs like product, laundering them through shelters, underground trainers, even fake rescues. If Grit was stolen last night, that means they're watching you, not just randomly, actively. Jake's voice was low. Then we fight back. Avery hesitated. That means going public eventually. Not until we're ready, Lana said. Avery agreed. I'll start compiling a list of compromised facilities. You keep feeding me intel. If they come again, don't chase. Document. They're counting on you to panic. After the call ended, Jake stayed seated for a long time. The journal lay open in his lap. He flipped back through the entries. Notes on eating habits, movement, sunlight preferences, barks. Then, the newest page. Grit, stolen and returned. Not just notes anymore. Testimony. He looked down at Grit, who had finally fallen asleep under his hand. Not again, he whispered. They won't get another chance. The morning after Grit's abduction and rescue, the air in Jake Reamer's house was different. Heavier, alert, as though every creak of the floor or rustle of wind might be a sign of return. The dogs were subdued, sticking close to Jake's feet or Lana's legs. Even Rust, usually the first to bark at the sound of a car engine, was silent that morning. They all knew something had changed. Lana stood at the kitchen counter, clutching a mug of coffee and scrolling through her email, while Jake reviewed the latest notes in his leather journal. The pages were no longer just records of behavior. They were becoming evidence, each entry a thread in the unspooling tapestry of something bigger. The phone buzzed. It was Avery Clay. Jake put her on speaker. Her voice came through low and precise, as always. I've got something. Pulled the chip data from your dogs and cross-referenced it with trafficking reports and veterinary records, including those that were sealed post-raid. Jake leaned in, bracing himself. There's a pattern, Avery said, and it leads back to a facility just outside Bloomfield, Illinois. On paper, it used to be a training ground for police K9S. Shut down 5 years ago due to funding cuts. Reopened last year under a different name, Stonehurst Behavioral and Canine Rehabilitation. Except no dogs ever got adopted from there. Jake exchanged a glance with Lana. Avery continued. There was a police raid there 7 days ago. It wasn't widely reported. Local jurisdiction, quiet sweep, no media, but I've got access to a leaked incident summary. They confiscated 25 dogs. Only 16 made it to shelter. The rest either died or were moved. Jake's voice was tight. You're saying our dogs were from there? They were part of the group left behind, Avery confirmed. They were being stored temporarily in a mobile unit, unmarked vehicle, parked on the service road. When the heat came down, whoever ran the operation fled and dumped the cargo. They weren't meant to survive. Lana closed her eyes. That explains the wounds, the chains, the way they were laid out like trash. Jake stood up, anger rising in his chest like a storm. So what now? Avery's tone darkened. Here's the twist. Stonehurst is owned by a shell company, Halberd Logistics, registered out of Delaware. You won't find a public-facing website, but they've got dozens of satellite facilities across 4 states: Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, and Wisconsin. Jake froze. Here. Exactly, Avery said. Your town isn't just a hiding place. It's a link in the chain. Lana crossed the room and opened her laptop. I'll map the Stonehurst locations. If we can identify another shipment, another storage site, maybe we can stop the next one. Jake shook his head slowly. We go public with this, they'll come after us. They already are. Avery paused. You're not wrong, but staying quiet doesn't make you safer. It makes you useful. That night, after Lana left and the dogs had settled, Jake sat in the garage alone. He opened the journal to a blank page and wrote, Chapter, The Cost of Truth. Stonehurst confirmed. Origin of Grit, Brisk, Luna. All others likely same route. His handwriting grew heavier with each word. They left them to die. That wasn't logistics. That was a message. He looked over at the dogs, who now lay in tighter packs than before, drawn to one another like survivors of a storm, clinging to the only warmth that remained. The next day, Avery sent over an encrypted file. Inside were photos from the raid. Dogs in wire cages, concrete cells streaked with blood, men with blurred faces hauling crates into trucks. Jake scrolled through the images in silence until one photo made him stop cold. A scarred dog, half in shadow, muzzle torn, stood chained to a wall. Brisk. His face was unmistakable. Jake turned the laptop toward Lana, who immediately recognized him too. She put a hand to her mouth. He was the leader there, she whispered. Not just another victim. He tried to protect the others. The weight of that realization hung between them. He remembers, Jake said. He remembers everything. Later that evening, as snow fell quietly outside, Jake and Lana sat across from one another at the dining table. The laptop, journal, and a map of the Midwest lay between them. Jake tapped the table. We either stay silent and wait for them to strike again, or we do something dangerous. Lana's voice was calm. There's a third option. Jake raised an eyebrow. We build a case, quietly, piece by piece. And when we're ready, we expose them so thoroughly, there's nowhere left to hide. Jake exhaled. And if they take the dogs before then? Lana looked at him, voice firm. They won't. That night, Jake moved the crates from the garage to the basement, reinforced the locks, kept the dogs close. Brisk slept near the stairs, his body tense even in rest. Luna followed Jake everywhere. Grit now slept beneath his desk, her breathing shallow but steady. Each scar, each behavior, every glance, they weren't just symptoms, they were evidence. And somewhere in Bloomfield, someone thought these animals were gone for good. They were wrong. The snowstorm hit 2 nights after Avery's confirmation. A thick curtain of white smothered Appleton, muffling the town beneath layers of quiet tension. Jake Reamer stood at the living room window, arms crossed, eyes tracking every pair of headlights that passed along the frosted street. Behind him, the dogs had been moved again, this time to a reinforced temperature-controlled cellar that Avery jokingly called the bunker. But nothing about the moment felt funny. They were going to make a move. Avery Clay had spent the last 48 hours working with Lana on a digital trap, a fabricated file filled with faked transport logs, mock addresses, even a leaked photo of Zane in a supposed new cage. The plan was simple: post the file into a hidden trafficking forum and wait for someone to bite. Someone cocky or desperate enough to claim ownership or act to cover their trail. Jake hated playing bait, but he hated waiting even more. The post went live at 11:02 per. Lana and Jake sat in silence, listening to the wind rake against the siding. Brisk paced the top step of the basement door, body taut. Luna hadn't left Jake's side all evening. Rust hadn't eaten. Avery stayed on a video call in the background, monitoring reactions to the fake post. "They'll move if they think their secrets are exposed," she said, "especially if they suspect someone's talking." Jake nodded but didn't answer. He had learned long ago that anticipation made men either foolish or focused. It was 3:41 a.m. when Brisk lunged at the garage door. Jake jolted awake, reaching instinctively for the bat under his couch. He moved fast. No hesitation. Luna growled low behind him. The security system pinged once, motion detected in the backyard. Lana was already pulling up the feed on her phone. "There," she whispered, pointing. Two shadowed figures moved behind the shed. One crouched low, the other carrying something long and metal. Jake didn't wait. He flicked off all lights, signaled to Lana, and moved around to the side exit. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he crept along the outer wall, bat gripped tight, breath barely visible in the frozen air. Brisk followed, silent as a ghost. The backyard gate clicked. Then a voice, low, hoarse, unfamiliar. "Check the window, I'll handle the side." Jake froze. Adrenaline blurred the edges of the cold. He waited. One step, then another. Brisk stood motionless beside him, head lowered, eyes locked on the dark. A figure stepped around the corner, just 10 feet away. Brisk growled, not loud, but primal, enough to make the man stop. Jake stepped out from the shadows and struck fast, catching the intruder across the ribs. The man staggered back with a choked curse, dropping a crowbar into the snow. Brisk barked, sharp and commanding. The second figure panicked. From the far side of the house came the sound of a window cracking. Luna howled from inside. Lana opened the door just in time to shine a flashlight in the second intruder's face, snapping a photo in the process. He turned and fled, boots skidding, disappearing into the white. The first man, clutching his ribs, scrambled after him, leaving behind the crowbar, a burner phone, and a trail of bloody footprints in the snow. Back inside, Jake slammed the door shut and double-locked it. Brisk sat beside him, tongue out, tail thumping once against the floor. They had chosen well. That morning, Avery called with an update. It worked. Someone on the forum viewed the file, then went dark. Minutes later, the GPS on the trap file pinged from a warehouse IP in Madison. Then they sent 2 men to your house. That's not coincidence. Lana uploaded the photos. We got a clear shot of one. Maybe facial recognition will catch something. Jake sat at the table, exhausted, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee. They're not going to stop. "No," Avery replied, "but now we know who's scared." Jake looked toward the basement door, where Luna and Grit lay curled up together, eyes alert, tails twitching whenever the wind rattled the window panes. "They're not just rescue dogs anymore," he said softly. "They're warning systems, shields." Avery's voice softened. "They're family." That afternoon, as Lana reviewed forum logs and Avery traced financial data from the burner phone, Jake took a walk through the garage alone. Snow still clung to the windows. On the far bench sat the leather notebook. He opened to the newest page. Brisk sensed presence before camera alert. Protected perimeter. Luna warned internal threat, responded to glass impact. All others alert, silent, no panic. Trust level, unshakable. He wrote slower than usual. Less about behavior, more about who they were becoming. Then, on a fresh page, he wrote something different. Mission log day 1. Objective, hold the line, expose the chain, protect the unit. Status, still standing. Outside, the sky cleared briefly. Sunlight struck the glass just right, casting a long reflection of Brisk, seated at the garage door again, watching east. The day of the hearing arrived cold and gray, the courthouse in downtown Appleton blanketed in a film of melting snow. A long line of bare trees stood outside the entrance like solemn guards. Jake Reamer stood at the foot of the courthouse steps, his hands buried deep in the pockets of a worn brown coat. He had worn this same coat during his last deployment, and now, ironically, it was the only thing that felt like armor. Lana walked beside him, composed but pale. She wore a dark wool dress coat with a navy scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. Her eyes scanned every window, every parked vehicle. There had been too many nights of waiting, of whispers in the dark and shadowed SUVs idling near their street. Today was different. Today, their silence was ending. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with quiet tension. The public wasn't invited. This was a closed evidentiary hearing requested by federal investigators following a joint task force operation, spurred by the materials Avery Clay had compiled and forwarded through backdoor channels. At the defense table sat a man in his early 50s with thin, graying hair and a lean, almost clinical build. His name was Victor Dane, the registered operator of Halberd Logistics. In person, he looked less like a criminal and more like an accountant. Clean nails, wire-rimmed glasses, beige suit that hadn't seen dirt in a decade. But Jake didn't need to see filth to smell rot. Victor never looked at Jake. Not once. The judge, Marion Holt, a woman in her late 60s with short-cropped white hair and glasses chained around her neck, called the room to order. Her presence was commanding without raising her voice. Holt had a reputation for fairness, and Jake clung to that. "Call your next witness," the prosecutor said. Jake stood. Every part of him tensed. He walked forward under the fluorescent lights, took the oath, and sat down before the microphone. Lana sat behind him, silent, steady. Grit and Luna were waiting in a van outside with a handler from the Humane Division, under federal protection. But Brisk was here, sleeping beneath the table like an anchor tethering Jake to the present. The prosecutor began. "Mr. Reamer, tell us in your own words what you found on Highway 41. Jake spoke slowly, clearly. He described the snow, the 8 dogs curled in the ditch, their ribs, their scars, their silence, how he had carried them home in the back of his rig, how he had spent the next several weeks uncovering the trail, first with Lana, then Avery. Each scar, each chip, each whistle-blown document. He never once raised his voice. He didn't need to. When asked to describe Brisk's behavior, Jake's voice caught. "This dog," he said, glancing down where Brisk lay. "He watched over the others when they were too weak to move. He barked before the cameras could warn us. He took a hit for me, on the night they came back. He isn't just some damaged dog. He's a soldier." There was silence in the courtroom for a beat too long. The prosecutor continued, playing video clips from Lana's camera footage, the night of the attempted break-in, the microchip scanner at Dr. Rhonda Maple's clinic, the footage of Grit limping back from Silver Ridge Park, a diagram of Brisk's x-rays showing healed fractures. Then Avery's report. The cross-state trafficking data, the financial trail back to Halberd Logistics, and an anonymous whistleblower's email about Stonehurst units being moved before heat arrives. Victor Dane sat still, expression unreadable. Only when Lana testified did he seem to react, blinking slightly when she described the fabricated digital trap and the GPS signal that led directly to a Halberd-linked warehouse outside Madison. The judge leaned forward. "You've connected these dogs to this man through financial records, chip IDs, and physical injuries," she said. "But do you believe, beyond the data, that these dogs remember?" Jake answered quietly, "Yes, Your Honor. They remember not because of pain, but because of what they chose to do after." Later, in closing remarks, the prosecutor cited Jake's journal pages. Every line, every behavior, every note. The dogs weren't just evidence. They were witnesses with their own form of testimony. The hearing adjourned without final judgment that day. The case was to proceed to federal court. But no one in the room left unchanged. As the room emptied, Jake sat still at the bench, hand resting loosely on Brisk's shoulder. Then Brisk stood, stretched, and walked around the bench. Quietly, without command, he rested his head on Jake's knee. It wasn't for comfort. It was gratitude. Jake placed a hand on Brisk's broad neck and closed his eyes. In that moment, the courtroom wasn't just a legal space. It was a place of reckoning, of restoration. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, and for the first time in a long time, Jake could breathe. The backyard had changed. Where there had once been patchy grass and a rusting barbecue pit, now stood a neat fenced-in field, half shaded by 2 young maple trees and framed by raised garden beds Lana had designed herself. A small wooden bench sat beneath the larger tree, carved by hand with the words, "We stayed." Jake Reamer leaned against the porch railing, a mug of black coffee warming his palms. The morning sun filtered softly through the trees, scattering light across the open yard. Mace and Rust were sprawled across the patio, basking in the early heat. Grit chased butterflies with silent glee near the garden hose. Luna, as always, lingered by the stairs, ears perked toward the gate. A year had passed since the hearing. Avery Clay's investigation had gone national. Federal charges were filed. Victor Dane was behind bars, awaiting trial for multiple counts of animal trafficking, abuse, and obstruction. The Stonehurst network had unraveled like rotten rope. 4 facilities closed, 3 more under surveillance. The dogs who survived had been rehomed or placed into therapeutic foster programs, each with a story and name, but 8 had stayed. After months of review and a psychological assessment from the local humane board, Jake was granted full custodianship of the entire group. The papers had arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who had no idea what he was handing over. Jake hadn't even opened the envelope until Lana read it aloud, her voice shaking at the edges. Lana lived next door now, though most nights she slept on Jake's couch or in the sunroom she'd turned into a reading nook. She wore her hair shorter these days, a chin-length cut that framed her sharp, thoughtful face. She still wrote, more than ever, but her next book, she'd told Jake, would not be fiction. Behind him, the screen door creaked open. "Morning," Lana said, stepping out in worn jeans and a light blue flannel shirt. Her hands held a small plate of eggs and toast, and she nudged his elbow as she passed. "Dog's out early," she noted, setting the plate down on the porch table. Jake nodded. "They've started doing that. Like they know this place is theirs now." Lana sat beside him. "Because it is." A light breeze rustled the tree branches. Then, at the far end of the driveway, the soft crunch of gravel. Jake looked up, narrowing his eyes as a small figure came into view. A girl, no more than 11, walking slowly toward the house, with a navy blue backpack slung over one shoulder and a stuffed lion tucked beneath her arm. Her hair was long and light brown, tied into a loose braid. Her eyes were the same pale blue as Jake's. Lily. He stood before he realized it, the mug falling from his hand into the grass. She stopped a few feet from the porch, silent. Luna stood and walked to her, tail wagging slow, cautious. Lily dropped to her knees without a word and buried her face in the dog's fur. Jake stepped off the porch, heart thudding in his chest. "Lily..." She looked up. "Hi, Dad." Her voice was small, confident. Jake crouched beside her, hands trembling. "Where's your mom?" "She dropped me off at the gas station," Lily said, stroking Luna's head. "Said I could choose. I told her I want to be here." Jake blinked hard. "She let you go?" "She said, you'd know what to do." Lana appeared behind them, quietly setting a second coffee down next to Jake's spilled one. She offered a gentle nod to Lily, who nodded back like they already knew each other. Jake tried to speak, but nothing came out. Lily looked up again. "Can I stay? Just for a while?" Jake opened his arms, and Lily fell into them, sobbing quietly into his chest. The dogs began to circle around them, Brisk, Grit, Echo. Mace rested his head gently on Lily's shoulder, as if offering a vow. Even Rust, always hesitant, sat near her, tail twitching. A few hours later, Lana unpacked an extra mattress into the sunroom. Jake made grilled cheese the way Lily remembered. The dogs lay at her feet while she read a picture book aloud. She had changed, older, quieter, but the way she laughed when Brisk snuck her toast off the table hadn't aged a day. That night, Jake sat on the porch alone, moonlight pouring across the yard like a promise fulfilled. The journal rested open on his lap, pen in hand. 1 year later, custody granted. Lily chose to come home. Brisk leads the group in the mornings. Grit no longer flinches at doors. Luna guards the gate. We have a garden now, and something better, a reason to stay. He paused, then added, "They are not blood, but they are family. We all chose each other." Inside, Lily and Lana laughed at something on the TV. The dog shifted sleepily on the rug. And Jake, for the first time in a very long time, didn't feel broken, or haunted, or alone. He felt whole. Sometimes family isn't who we're born to, it's who chooses to stay, who waits quietly by the door when the world has walked away, who guards our hearts when we no longer know how to protect them. Jake didn't set out to be a hero, he just chose not to turn away. And in doing so, he discovered something most of us forget in the rush of everyday life. That love, real love, isn't loud. It's patient, it's loyal, and when given a second chance, it returns, often in the shape of those who cannot speak, but never stop listening. The Bible reminds us in Proverbs 12:10, the righteous care for the needs of their animals. And perhaps through that simple care, through that quiet act of mercy, God shows us how to heal what we thought was lost. So, if this story moved you, if it stirred something inside you, don't let it end here. Share this with someone who still believes in kindness. Comment below if you've ever been saved by love you didn't expect. And if you believe that every broken heart deserves to be made whole again, type Amen in the comments. Subscribe for more stories that prove mercy still walks among us. And may God bless you and every creature under his sky, today and always.